Okay, so welcome to KitaKasiKonteks, podcast yang pertama, episode 4. Why is it episode 4?
Because we are like Star Wars. You'll have to wait for the episodes 1, 2, 3 after.
But 10 years later, we'll do 1, 2 and 3. So, Najib, Prof?
How are you today, Prof?
Okay, it's a Friday today. So
it's a Friday, yes,
right?
yeah.
Okay, so we're talking about ESG today,
yeah,
right? Which is very, very big word.
Yeah.
Affects everybody.
Yeah.
But the reality is not everybody really knows. And I think even for me, when I started, main angguk dia.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
People
yeah,
talk, pandai lah,
Correct.
And I think that still happens a lot.
Yes,
and it still happens with me as well.
Yeah.
Because benda baru, we learn new things all the time.
Yeah.
But we don't want to look silly.
Yes.
So we're like,
yeah, I think everybody has adopting a tunggu dan lihat, I think, sort of attitude towards it right now. But I think ini sesuatu yang akan berlaku lah.
Right. So let's try and break down and kita kasih konteks on ESG.
What is ESG? And how do we simplify what is a very big topic on everybody's lips, but I think everybody is in the angguk sort of mindset at the moment, right? So how do we explain it so more people can feel it?
That's a good question. So how do we put it into context? Huh? So ESG, the acronym is alphabet soup,
Yes.
Environmental, social, governance.
Yes.
Right. I think the best way to explain is through history. Right. So what's happened in the world from the 70s, 80s,
yeah,
a lot of the Industrial Revolution,
yeah,
and what happened was we polluted the world a lot, right? And it got to a point where flooding, climate change is getting hotter. We see a lot of environmental problems.
Yes.
Right. And therefore, the answer to control this is this ESG framework. Right?
Okay.
It has evolved, of course. There was CSR, there was HSE, CSR, whatnot. But now, from a corporate point of view, they've come up with a framework. They call it ESG. It's a way to think about how you, as a business, acts, behaves, and reports.
Yeah.
So that you are not making the world a worse off place. You are not
correct.
Further, creating a problem for the world. I think that's the easiest way to explain ESG. Right.
For completeness, I think we should say E is environmental, right? Environment, right? So S, social, right? And G is governance.
That's right.
So alam sekitar, yeah,
social,
and
tadbir urus
or tata kelola.
Yes,
which is the hot
ESG,
word
that's
now.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
And these are the buckets, so to speak.
Yeah.
That how you look at your business, right? From
correct.
What is it doing in the environment bucket? What is it doing from the social point of view?
Yeah.
And how is it being governed? Or what is the governance of tadbir urus dia lah?
Yes.
Right. So that's the easiest way to explain ESG. So that being said, what we need to understand now is why does it affect everybody? Why is it so important? Why is it on the lips of everybody now? Right.
Yeah.
So maybe you can give some.
Okay. So I think all three buckets have got different measures. Yeah. So I think that's very important. So we tend to talk a lot about the E bucket, the environment bucket, and there we have things like scopes of emissions. For example, when we look at carbon footprint, so scope 1 is the direct emissions of a company. Scope 2 is within the supply chain, and then scope 3 is further out, right? So, for example, the financial institutions look at scope 3 as a major impact on themselves, in that if they provide loans, for example, to companies, and the companies have got carbon footprints which are high, for example, and the loans are still on the name of the bank, because the bank actually is owning most of that debt, right? They will also own the carbon footprint, And how does this impact business? Is that then business now has to show the bank that it's not going to increase the bank's carbon footprint. So scope 3 is one that a lot of people have not noticed is happening, but it's impacting directly the ability to be financed.
So just coming back, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, this is from the environmental footprint that they have this, right? So what I was trying to look to is that ESG affects everybody.
Yeah.
Right. From your CEO all the way to your
Okay. Yeah. I see where you're coming from. Yeah.
And the reason is, and not just that, the wider view, the families,
Yeah.
right, and society in general. So you can't run away from ESG. And a contoh is like harga ayam.
Yeah.
For example, the price of chicken, right? Because of ESG, because right, there will be implications on the price.
Yes.
Right, the cost of production is higher.
Mm.
Right, you have to make sure that the duck, for example, is produced in a environmental safe way, right?
Mm.
And therefore harga tu naik sikit, which means harga ayam pun will be slightly higher, right?
Yes.
So for the layman, for everybody, ESG will affect you whether you like it or not, right? And that's, I think, why it's such an important concept for everybody to understand,
Yeah.
right? And why we are taking ESG as the mode or the topic of our first podcast.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, but we talk about businesses in general.
Yes.
Right. So, the effect of ESG for businesses.
Yeah.
Right. Let's look into that.
Mm.
First of all, Bursa, for example. So
Yeah.
the public listed companies in Malaysia have a reporting requirement that was just announced last year, December 2023,
Correct.
that they have to report on sustainability, right, by the end of this year.
Yeah. Disclosures.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's the reporting game, right?
Yes, it is a reporting game. Yeah.
But so let's talk about that first at the public listed level, right?
Right. Okay.
Our companies, what should they be doing? Right.
Okay, so certainly at the public listed level, they are adopting certain norms and standards. Right? You have the GRI, so several different standards which
These are reporting standards, right?
which are reporting standards, which
Yeah.
means you have categories of headline items to be reported, like your carbon footprint is one, but also how your people are being treated, whether they are from the factory shop floor level all the way up to management. What are you doing and as far as environmental facilitation is concerned? Are you planting trees? Are you not polluting? Right? Are you consciously trying to limit your impact on the environment? So all of these now are becoming reporting. But the thing about the reporting is, although it's structured in a way, they are very much voluntary disclosures at this
So
time.
it's still very early on, the first step, right?
It is very much early on in the first step. I think many companies are trying to make the reporting more tangible, as opposed to basically a story of our company, like a company profile. But the standards of reporting across organizations are obviously different. I think for large companies, what their real concern is also the supply chain.
The supply chain, people who
Yeah.
supply to them.
Correct, and that is where
The
there are a lot
SMEs
of slack jaws and people going, well, what do you want us to say, right? And if we aren't able to comply, will you still buy from us?
Now
Yeah.
let's talk about the impact to SMEs.
Yes.
Right, so the SMEs who supply to the public listed companies, that's one category, I'll
Yeah.
say. And then there are SMEs who supply globally,
Yeah.
who are part of a global supply chain.
Yes. Correct. Yeah.
So let's talk about them and how ESG affects them and what should they be doing. Right.
So I think.
Are they doing anything anyway? Right.
I've seen evidence now from the work that AMRACE does on the ground with companies that are looking for first high-tech industries to service, right? And when they have these kind of requirements like aerospace that they want to service, they have to look at these compliances that are going to come into the picture, right?
So they are already being affected.
They are already being affected.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are already in the aerospace supply chain, for example, already have in their annual audit a question: what is your ESG reporting, right? Already at the SME level. But as far as an SME is concerned, the number one question on every SME's mind is cost.
Yes.
Right? What is this going to cost me? And very legitimate question: if this impacts fundamentally, what are the basis of the costs of the SMEs? And I think we've seen enough in our national plans, in our ministers' reportings, that overemphasis on low-cost labor, over dependence on certain subsidies and so on and so forth, have created a certain business environment for SMEs that has made it difficult for them to evolve into something which may require a very different way of operating. So if I give you an example, right, where perhaps before you did not have to look at reporting on people development.
Yes.
Right, that was very much an internal issue.
That's right.
If you took care of your people, you trained your people, that was your business, and it's a question of your employees' happiness. But now somebody outside is asking you,
What are you doing?
are your employees happy? And show me the evidence, right? Now I've got to plan training programs. I got to plan people development roadmaps. I've never done this before. I got one person in HR. It's also my person in finance. How am I going to get them to do this reporting? So all these questions are now coming up in the SME, right? And that's S. If you look at G, right? Governance. Number one challenge, I think, with a lot of SMEs is financial management, because as an SME, you're constantly battling post-COVID, cash flow. How are you going to manage investments? How are you going to manage your increased costs and so on and so forth? And it's very much in the seat of the CEO or the owner-operator, if you like. And when it's there, fundamentally, there's a governance problem already. The decision maker is also the implementer, right? And also the guy who is check and balancing the, So this kind of situation now. How do we get out of this if we are very small SMEs with limited resources?
True.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. So my view on the ground, what I see is that if you're not affected, if your margins are affected, then you'll just tunggu dan lihat lah, see what happens. Right? But there is a case for what I would say proactive adoption. Because as I've been reading and talking to people, right? From a threat, it can become an opportunity.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Indeed,
so let's say there's requirements for certain contracts that require you to be, to have reporting or to have, certain boxes ticked on the ESG scale, and if you have that, then it qualifies you for more business. For example, right?
Correct. Yes.
So that's one opportunity. Right. So as a framework, it's good in the sense that it makes you or the SMEs, for example, in particular, because the larger companies, they are better structured, let's say, right? But for SMEs, it pushes you to professionalize.
Yes.
Right. On all counts, especially in the processes.
True.
Right. Because SMEs, we know as a fact, this is where there are problems, right? It's very owner-operated, right? The company is a mirror of the owner usually.
Yes.
Right. So if the owner is very, very, precise and detailed, then usually you will see the management of the company to take this a similar mirror to that. But if the owner is more, sales driven, right, all about revenue and not really on the processes, then the company will take the same kind of reflection. So what ESG brings for me, what I think is it forces people to professionalize, right? But it's a cost. Right. And this is why I think that there is need for people like us, I would say, to help them on the way. A lot of other people as well, not just us.
Of course,
right?
of course,
to professionalize, and this is coming back to processes. I mean, you're an engineer, you know this better than me. Right? How do they start moving into getting their processes at least stabilized and documented, so that they can take the challenge when it comes, or use it as an advantage?
So, so you use the term professionalized, right? So let me run with that, because really it starts top down. Okay, so as you mentioned, it's about the owner, right, and how the owner is thinking of the business. So in this case, professionalizing means structure, right, which means standards. And the first thing that an SME would see when they see standards, they would look at it as a necessary evil. This is quite important. The perception is always, this is a necessary evil. Let me have, I have to do this. It's just part. Let me try to get over with it. And there are many practices where audits happen once a year, and after the audit, it's a lot of preparation prior to the audit. Then there's the whole fanfare of the audit, and the auditor, and then after the audit, the manual goes back on the shelf, and for another year, right? And very simply, there could be mission statements and so on and so forth written on walls, which nobody really pays attention to, right? So, and I've tested this before.
But we've been there before in the early days, right?
Yes. Well, unfortunately for me, because in aerospace, you can't actually get away with it because you have multiple audits in a year. So you're constantly getting audited. But where I was getting to is this: your mindset has to be that it is adding value, right? So if from the top, the idea is that we're going to do this to professionalize, because professionalizing the organization means to add value and allow us to win more work, then that mindset drives the transformation of the organization, and therefore ESG becomes an opportunity.
That's right.
Yeah. But if the mindset is compliance, then what you'll always be doing is you'll be fighting the wave, right?
Okay. So I'm just kind of taken back to my early days. It was like in aerospace. I was a small SME, and every time we had an audit, lama, kena spend money, nak kena do the books right, look into everything again. Right? So it becomes a chore. Right. But the fact of the matter, and this maybe with age, as you mature in your management, right, then you realize, no, if I had kept my books better, right,
hindsight,
I would have won more business later on, because at some point you need to submit everything, right, and show that you have strong growth. And it's the same thing for ESG as well, right?
Correct.
So I think SMEs need to look at it as an opportunity, right, and act on it faster, right, while other people are not. Because the further you are ahead, I think it gives you a competitive advantage.
Yes.
Are there any standards for SMEs now?
So yes, in fact, Securities Commission has been very gracious in coming up with the SDEG, right?
SEDG.
But it's a good set of harmonized standards to, I think, 3 major international standards, and simple enough so that it's structured that an SME can follow the reporting. Now, having said that, it doesn't guarantee that you are compliant to your end customer if you're an SME in an export environment requirements. It does not guarantee that, right? But it's a good reference for you to start comply with. And certainly, if you're planning to get listed on Bursa, then it's one of the things that they will use as a tool.
Okay. So let's take this conversation further down. To this really small micro businesses.
Yes, okay, right. Micro businesses.
So kedai makan, servicing shops. Right. Does ESG have an effect?
I think eventually there will be an effect here, because directly, potentially in the finance of such businesses, footprint of such a business is of course very small. So if financing that is accessible to them is at the micro sort of level, where there's not much in terms of conditions to it, and because it's a small financing for a small business with a small impact, it might not affect the financing. But if you start getting into a restaurant sort of level, then if more standards get rolled out, which may happen in Europe or America, for example, but then adopted or adapted by maybe your customers, as they want to know, what is your sustainability ranking or something like that, then that could come in. But as I'm explaining it, you can already see it's quite a distance,
so
right?
Asking,
Yeah.
True. Okay, let's take this conversation away from the SMEs to a national level.
Okay.
So we know since I think the current government came in, right? We've been hit by a lot of plans, right? The past few 6 months, right? We have the NIMP. We have the energy transition roadmap. NATR. Then what was the other one? We had a few.
This year will be the IESG.
IESG, that's right.
This year.
So all of this, right? Does it articulate what SMEs should do? Because I think there's a bit of a gap. Right, government biasa lah. I mean, their policy, their job is to create policy. But the translation of such, I would say, policy documents onto the ground, who's looking into that, right?
I think the current government is taking a much more proactive role, certainly, through the agencies. So at MIDA, for example, they're already responding to this, and they have a task force which are looking at supply chain ESG issues, right, and potentially up to compliance and so on and so forth, right. But at the moment, it's looking at it as a whole. And like I said, the IESG will be out this year, in which case standards will be articulated for compliance, right. And I'm sure it will be to at least the SDG standards that Security Commission has come up with. But it doesn't necessarily address the implementation gap, right? So I think the intention is certainly there. I think at the government level, there is the effort to address that gap, but whether or not the gap is addressed, you can ask the question simply, was Industry 4.0 addressed by the government? It was. There were many initiatives that would allow SMEs to get involved, from grants to assessment methodologies. But the problem was, at the SME level, they were not yet bersedia untuk adopt these things, right? And it's because of that need was not there, right? I'm operating just as well as I am. I'm happy with my margins. I'm happy with my revenue. So I have no case for change. What's interesting with ESG though, I think it's quite different from Industry 4.0. You cannot run away from it, right?
That's right.
And just, we're talking about these small macro businesses, and just, throwing a few things that could affect them. Any of those things could suddenly become very real. We have a generation of consumers now which are very aware.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
So it could just be a social media thing for sustainability, and suddenly your business is judged against standards which are global by your own customers, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So yeah.
So my view, lowest hanging fruit is the S. Social.
Yes, of course.
Right. Especially for smaller companies, because like I said, your environmental footprint isn't that large.
Yeah.
Right. So you should be looking at the social pillar, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. And this means fair treatment of your employees, making sure that they have work-life balance.
Yeah.
Right. Tak boleh lah kerah-kerah macam dulu kan.
Yeah.
And I think that is probably the lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah.
For smaller companies.
Yes.
To start their journey.
Yeah.
Right. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Definitely. And if you're going to be faulted on something, it's how you treat your people.
That's right. We've seen this.
Yeah, we've seen this. So
certain companies.
and certainly socially, if you get viral for mistreating your employee, I can guarantee you people will not be coming to your shops.
In the age of social media, it's quite it's a risk.
It's a definite
risk. So that would be where you would want to start.
Yeah.
Right. And then we mentioned the governance part.
Yeah.
Which is a challenge because by default, you said just now.
The check and balance.
Right. I'm the owner. It's my business.
I can't afford an auditor. I can't afford a separate accountant. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. So that is probably another area you want to go into.
Yeah.
Right. And then the third pillar, the environment pillar, is just to really check. Is to really check. What your footprint is on the environment and try to manage that, right?
One of the biggest opportunities is, and I've seen this as a major gap which can be easily addressed, right, is the adoption of technology to help manage these things. So, for example, an accounting software, rather than your paper ledgers and books, it's going to force you to report structured accounts. Today, you can get stuff freeware even if you really push for it, right? That will allow you to have that kind of demonstrable governance on your business, and many businesses still don't do this. So that's a technological adoption which
can help you. Right?
Yeah, and it's not huge cost, right? It's some effort. Actually, to be honest, it's about whether or not you're going to bother to upgrade yourself to learn how to use this piece of software.
Okay. I think another thing I want to address is the fear around acronyms of ESG.
Yeah.
Right. So one of the things that I struggle with sometimes.
Yeah.
And I mean, first I want to say in my view, there's no ESG expert.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Because it's too large. It's too wide.
The tablets are being written still on the mountain, Mount Sinai.
It's too wide.
Nabi Musa belum turun lagi.
So if anybody claims, and people ask me, are you an ESG expert? I said no. If anybody claims they are an ESG expert, then they are not. Because you must have the humility to say that this is such a wide field. Right?
Yes.
I might know part of it. I might have experience in certain, pillars or certain areas, but I cannot claim to be an ESG expert. I think that's number one. Secondly, I think month by month, new acronyms will come out.
Yes.
Right, so you've got ESG, SDG, carbon capture, CCS,
Yeah.
All these things, and this is why we're talking back. We came to the beginning, right?
Yeah.
It comes to a point where people are like, play along, right? Because So what I'm trying to put out here is don't be afraid of not knowing.
Yes.
Because actually a lot of people don't know, right? And a lot of people just play along.
Yeah.
That's my view. I'm not sure if you.
Yeah, and
we learn new things every day.
True. But I think to bring some focus to it, because I don't, it's not about just being, let's just try and be ESG compliant. Let's be focused in terms of, well, who do we have to serve, right? Look at our clients and say, well, these guys, and what are they saying? And I think that's your first compliance requirement really, because that's going to affect your top line and bottom line, right? Eventually,
Sure.
right? So if your clients are signaling certain things, then use that as your guide, right?
So let's kind of try and put everything into context.
Yeah,
Kasih
kita kasih
context
konteks.
balik,
Yes, yeah.
So let me try and give my understanding of how to look at it, right? So many years ago, I read a book, and it talked. I can't remember what the topic was. This is my problem. I read a lot, but I don't really remember which parts. Right? Kind of all gets mixed up because but you read certain parts of certain books, right?
Yeah.
But it talked about the evolution of business from being for profit to for benefit.
Yes.
Right, and I think
Yeah.
the easiest way to understand ESG for me, from my lens,
Yeah.
right, nak kasih konteks ni, is to think of a business for benefit,
Yes.
where everybody benefits.
Okay.
Right. So previous model was I need to profit at the cost of
Yeah.
somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. The next the ESG business model is
Yeah.
for benefit. Everybody has to benefit. The environment has to benefit.
Yeah.
Right. People who work for me has to benefit. The customer has to benefit.
Yeah.
And I benefit as well.
Yes.
And if you
yes.
do that, you are, for me, on the ESG line, basically. And then you take the
Yeah.
framework and you take whatever standards and you start reporting on
Yes,
that,
yes,
right? So
yeah.
I think that, for me, is the easiest way. What about you?
So the immediate response you get from most Malaysian SMEs will be, mana boleh buat business ini macam
semua kena menang.
semua kena happy kan, right? And I think this is where it is going to be a difficult transition because it requires a certain level of acceptance of change at a global level. You know, I mean, I'll give you a very good example. You know, sitting here right now, right? This is I collect guitars, and this is a Gibson SG Direct Truck signature guitar. So whoever out there who's a guitar nerd, they'll know what it is, right? But this guitar used to be made of Brazilian mahogany and rosewood.
Tak boleh tahu.
Today, if the wood that the guitars are made from, right?
This is mahogany.
This is mahogany, yeah.
Okay.
This is mahogany.
Right.
So and that's a rosewood. Well, it's a semi rosewood fretboard, right? If today the wood on this guitar is not certified, this guitar is actually illegal.
That's right.
Right. So the old guitars that some of the artists have, you know, which have all this vintage to them, some of them can't even be brought on tour because they can't leave the country where the guitarists have them because the wood doesn't carry the certificate, right? You know, so some countries will not allow the wood into the country. So when you look at that, that's an E thing,
Yes.
but it's implying G as well as S to some degree because how the rosewood was taken from the forest, there was an S issue because there were homes of indigenous people. So the story behind just this guitar, right, is and a lot of guitarists will know this because they will say, oh, this is pre then or before or post then and so on and so forth, right? So there you go, selling guitars. You know, if you just go into your rainforest here, say I'm going to become a guitar entrepreneur and cut down some trees and make some guitars, right? You might actually have a business which is a ESG non-starter. Yeah.
Right. And I think that perfectly illustrates the point that it affects everybody.
Yes.
Right. It affects everybody. Like it or not, ESG is here. The standards are being drawn in Malaysia at least.
Yes.
Right? If you are a global player or you're an international player, right? The standards are already there. It will be adopted from whoever you are, the supply chain that you're in, right? So there is no dodging this.
There's no dodging this. Yeah.
There's no dodging this, right?
Yeah.
So what I think we want to advocate is proactive adoption.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Use it as an advantage rather than a threat or
Yes.
a cost or just the compliance.
Yeah.
Right. And that would be our message to SMEs, right?
Yes.
Right. So use it as an advantage. Try to take, I would say, first mover.
Yeah.
Everybody is still kind of, waiting and wait and see.
Yeah.
Right. Try and use it as an advantage so that you can be on the competitive edge.
Yeah.
Right. When things really hit the
Correct.
fan. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So I think it gives us a good context. I think of where we are in this ESG journey in Malaysia. So hopefully we have kasih context to what this is, and maybe it's a good chance also, opportunity. At AMRACE we are training people.
Yes.
To understand this journey, and you've got a very interesting program.
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we realize is that for sustainability ESG, right?
Yeah.
A lot of a lot of the movement is top down. So
Yeah.
the conversation happens at the board level,
Yes.
travels to the C level,
Yeah.
but does not resonate at the mid and working level.
Yeah.
Right. So basically, you're just saying ESG, right? Shouting from the top, and the people in
Yeah.
the organization, apa benda ni?
Yeah.
Right. Why do we have to do this?
Yeah.
So I think an awareness,
Yeah.
right? What we're trying to do here,
Yeah.
KasiKonteks, but that has to happen in most companies, and all employees need to grasp this concept.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a training. It's just a 1-day module.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But-
Samudra. Right?
Samudra, right?
Yeah.
No, it's called, yeah. And what we do is we just bring people into the room and we explain what we've talked about,
Yeah.
right, through simulations,
Yes.
so that they feel, okay, now I understand, and
Yeah.
now I want to support my company to become
Yeah.
more ESG compliant. So that's one of the things, right, that we can do to help.
Yes.
Right? But there are a lot of others out there who do this, who are supporting this
Yeah.
movement. But what I want to take it back to is the awareness, right? You cannot push ESG down without getting other people
Buy-in.
buy-in
Yeah.
from your
The syndication. Within your
Right.
organization.
It's not accounting.
Yeah.
Right, you cannot just send an internal auditor and check
Yeah.
everything. Right? Because this is bigger. This is not something you can dodge.
Yeah.
This is something that people have to understand why.
Yeah.
People have to get on board,
Yes.
and as an organization, you need to embrace. Right.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, then
Yeah.
what happens? You
Yeah.
get accused of being a greenwasher.
Yes, the greenwasher.
Right.
Yeah.
And which is not
Yeah.
another controversial
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
So, damned if you are, damned if you don't. But
Yes.
but what we want is that at the end of the day, it's in the soul of the company.
But
It's
there's
in the
also a
DNA.
term now of rainbow washing,
Right.
because there's the green for environment, and there's the social color, and people are washing everything at the moment, and
Yes.
that shows how complex this ESG movement is.
So that's a good point.
Yeah.
Right. And we're talking from a Malaysian context, right? We're talking from a Malaysian context. But, and of course we have, it's a bit of a sensitive topic, right? But in Malaysia, we have our value system.
Yeah. I can see where you're going, and we're going to tread very carefully right now.
But I think this is something that should be,
Yeah.
that can be explained. We have our value system, which is different from the Western value system.
Sure. Yes.
Right? And whatever it is,
Yeah.
right? So as these standards come in,
Yeah.
right, I think it's very important for us as a country, and not just us, all Asian countries, because each country has its own value system, right?
Yeah.
To be able to say, yeah, we kind of accept your interpretation of ESG, but we also have our
Yes.
interpretation
Correct.
of ESG as
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
we will adhere to, right?
Yeah.
And as long as it's for the benefit, like I said, right, of ESG,
Yeah.
right, I think we should be able to work together.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's where, from a kind of global perspective, we have to
Yeah.
to go. If not, it will just be
Yeah.
one set of standards for
Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
taking into account cultural nuances,
Yeah.
geographical influences, and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, bit
Yeah,
sensitive, but I think.
No, I think the point is made, and,
Right.
and doesn't have to be labelled
Mhm.
at this point. But I think certainly as a country, ownership of what it is that our ESG, and forget about more sensitive sort of behavioural sort of areas. Just looking at carbon footprint in itself,
Yes.
I think we need to own our interpretation of how our carbon footprint is being managed, right? Because we are still a predominantly green country,
One of the few left.
One of the few left,
Right.
although some of that green might have shades of palm in it. There are even in that industry,
green.
it's still green, and
Right.
and they're doing things towards ensuring that
True.
the compliance is there. But nonetheless, I think in general, everybody's taken by surprise. The speed of this. I was talking to some Singaporeans recently who are involved with the ESG movement, and they speak about coastal fringes, right? It's encroaching on the mainland, on a daily basis. So, from a Singaporean standpoint, this is something that is going to fundamentally affect
Change.
them as a country. You're talking about land mass.
Getting smaller.
It's getting smaller, right? And if you're Mauritian or Maldivian, this is a very, very critical scenario
True.
already.
True.
I would recommend as well, I think, reading a book by Kim Stanley Robinson, The Ministry of the Future. It's a great book that gives a dystopian view of what happens if climate change were to take the turn that is being warned at COP28 recently, right? And I think the story starts in New Delhi, and a very catastrophic event that kills many people due to heat, right? And sometimes, when I read that book, and I think a few weeks after that, or a week after that, I went to Lima, the Langkawi International Maritime and Aerospace Exhibition, and it was sweltering. It was hot beyond belief, and just after reading this book, that very unusual heat, it really hit home for me that this is no longer a story that we have the full control, the narrative of, and I think COVID has demonstrated that very well.
True.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to wrap up, I think from the breadth or the width of our discussion, we are just kind of talking about 3 letters here.
Yeah.
But we've talked so wide, right?
Yeah.
And this is an illustration of how ESG affects me and you and everybody.
Yeah.
Right? You can take it from so many different angles, right?
Yeah.
You can't cover a lot of it in one simple podcast, but we hope that kita sudah kasih konteks sedikit, right? And we will continue to do so, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, from us, right, Prof.
Sila like dan share.
Like and share, and we'll cover more topics, right?
Yes.
With a bit more context, so that at least the conversations are more nuanced after this, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And not only that, episodes onwards we will get some guests, right? People who are experts in their fields, who to tolong kasih lagi banyak konteks.
Even in the global scenario, right?
Right.
We'll talk to people from other countries as well.
So, okay, bro.
Okay.
Episode 4 done, right? So we'll see you on the next episode at Kita
Kasih Konteks.